There is probably no other unknown creature that arouses more curiosity than the Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Yes, there is the Loch Ness Monster, the Chupacabra, and other great beasts of lore, but the Bigfoot remains the most compelling, as it pulls us towards ourselves, shadowing the unknown X factor of our very origins. The case files contain thousands of reported sightings, yet no actual specimen has ever been found. Hundreds of photographs exist, but the creature has not yet been identified. Still, the clues accumulate year after year. In the words of one Bigfoot investigator, it is an extremely complex phenomenon, with no starting point and no geographical limits. If this creature does exist, then it is most certainly a relative of man. Descriptions of the ape-like creature do not vary dramatically with credible sightings. The creature is anywhere from 6 to 10 feet tall, 300 to 1,000 pounds, and walks upright on 2 legs. Hair covers almost all of its body and ranges in color from black to silvery white, with the predominant color being brown or reddish brown. The creature is often reported to have a flat face and nose, a receding, sloped forehead with a prominent brow ridge, and a cone-shaped head, which sits on broad shoulders with no apparent neck. Its proportions are roughly those of a human being, except for its long, dangling arms. Bigfoot draws its name from the enormous footprints it leaves behind, many as long as 2 feet by 8 inches wide. The length of stride varies, but the distance is usually close to 4 feet between prints. There have been group sightings, 2 adults and 1 or more juveniles. The creature appears to be largely nocturnal. Species? Unknown at this time. When gorillas were first seen by white men early in the last century, the reaction to this discovery was one of shock and astonishment. Native stories of such creatures were well known, but were viewed as mere folklore and mythology by the scientific community. Prior to this paleontological milestone, man had the idea that he had more or less discovered everything there was to discover about ourselves. Bigfoot, also known in North America as the Sasquatch or the Oma. Was the Sasquatch here before the Indians? Thousands of Indian locations are named after the boss of the mountain, or the wild man, as the Bigfoot was originally called by the Amerindians. Indian cultures generally regard the wild man with the greatest respect. He is viewed as a special kind of being, perhaps because of his seemingly close relationship to humans. Many Indian elders regard him as standing on the border between animal and human consciousness, giving him a supernatural kind of power. But as special as he may be, there is no tribe that suggests that he is anything other than a physical being, living in the same physical dimensions as humans and other animals. He eats, he sleeps, gathers, and communicates with family members. Wild man or Sasquatch attributes from numerous reports. The smell of a Sasquatch far exceeds that of a bear or other mammals. Many cases report an intolerable stench when a Bigfoot is in the area. They vocalize in terrifyingly high-pitched scream-like mannerisms. Many recordings have surfaced in recent years. They knock trees, possibly to communicate with each other over long distances. They throw rocks and boulders. There are many reported cases where a Bigfoot throws rocks at campers, even boulders from the hilltops above if disturbed. They live in family units. Many cases report the sighting of not one but two or more individuals at a time, often with young in tow. They wash their food. In 1924, Albert Ostman was abducted by a Bigfoot, then held captive by a family unit. He noted, among other things, that the female Bigfoot washed and stacked leaves and vegetation. This behavior has been reported multiple times in the last 100 years. They may have developed a language. Many reports tell of a whinnying or gurgling whistle sound associated with their possible speech patterns. The creature has many names and is known by cultures all over the globe. Almas, Asia. Bigwas, BC has Lay community. Jinsung, Asia. Kakundukari, Africa. Momo, North America. Ngoi Rung, Asia. Nukluk, North America. Nyalmo, Asia. Oma, North America. Orang Pendak, Oceania. Sasquatch, North America. Tano Giant, Africa. Te Ima, Asia. Ukumar, Latin America. Yeren, Asia. Yeti, Asia. Yowie, Australia. It seems that the wild man may indeed be of a varied and widespread clan, encompassing every continent of the world. They all have one very distinct trait in common: an exceptionally big human-like foot. But in recent years, the enigma of the Bigfoot has taken another leap. The Bigfoot has dermal ridges. Throughout the last 100 years, there have been many wild man sightings in Kentucky. May 1894, Deep Creek. 5 men encounter man-beast, which raided farms and was tracked to a cave. February 1959, Covington. Motorists saw a large, hairy, two-legged creature on a bridge. In the 1960s, there were many sightings around the Kentucky Lake area. In one instance, a family reported to a local newspaper that they were fishing and saw a creature that walked like a man and drank from the lake using his hands. June 1962, Trimble County. 2 men saw a black, hairy, 6-foot creature attacking their dogs. Other activity was reported in the area. July 1962, Mount Vernon. 4 young people encountered a Sasquatch while in their parked car. The creature growled ferociously, scaring them into hysterics. June 1968, Murray. Doctor reports seeing a Sasquatch on the road. In the 70s, many sightings were reported from Boone County, from farmers waking up from frightened livestock. Spring 1976, near Pembroke. 5 witnesses to 3 sightings. 6-foot-tall creature, huge round shoulders, glowing green eyes, seen near remote houses at night. January 1977, Simpson County. Policeman sees Bigfoot crossing the road at night. Other sightings in the area. August 1978, near Owensboro. Several men corner a Sasquatch beside a pond, shoot it with pistols from 10 feet. It fled into the woods, leaving no trace of blood. August 1978, near Owensboro. Multiple witnesses see a man fire 3 .45 caliber bullets into a Bigfoot's chest from 45 feet away. It ran into the forest, never to be heard or seen again. October 1980, Maysville. An elderly man and woman see a white Sasquatch from their porch. Oddly enough, giant skeletons have been found in Kentucky. At Mammoth Cave, the skeleton of an 8-foot-tall giant was found along with a younger adolescent in 1811. In 1876, the New York Times ran an article that referred to the remains of 3 8-foot giants found in the state. In 1965, landowner Kenneth White was building cattle stalls when under a ledge he found a perfectly preserved skeleton, measuring 8 foot, 9 inches in length. He states that the arms were extremely long and the hands were very large. The skull was 30 inches in circumference. The eye and nose sockets were slits rather than cavities, and the area where the jawbone hinges to the skull was solid bone. Over the last 200 years or more, Bigfoot sightings, as well as other anomalous phenomena, have been reported at a place called Panther Rock in Anderson County. The following is from a letter found in the Kentucky Library dated 1840. It was on a cold night in the Blue Hills of Kentucky. We felt a presence that was undeniable in this place, where moonshiners and trappers roam. Long after the Indians were gone, we heard the scream of the wild man. Indeed, we knew we were trespassers in his world now. There are no human conveniences, no sheriff or law to call upon, just the wilderness in its perfect and unyielding state. The Amerindians say he was here long, long before them, and long before any white man came to this valley. We heard that scream, that unearthly, deafening, piercing scream, that unequivocally let us know that this was not our domain, and that all the progress man has made meant absolutely nothing in this place. In April, the reality team descended upon the outskirts of Anderson County. Their leader was Philip Spencer, a 30-year veteran of the paranormal and former resident of Anderson County. He returns to his early roots, to the area where he has documented hundreds of cases and spent much of his life. Many paranormal events have occurred here in Anderson County, also known to residents as the Frasier land. Many of these events are hard to explain in the rational cold light of day. Sightings of Bigfoot, strange lights, and last but not least, huge black cats. Philip Spencer recounts his own personal, terrifying experience with Bigfoot.
Many years ago, my friend and I were riding down the road that parallels this valley. And this is the valley where Salt River runs into Taylorsville Lake. It was late at night. We used to like to ride along, and we would take a large spotlight and shine through the valleys and just look at the animals, the deer specifically. And late one night we were cruising down the road. I was a passenger holding the light up and over the rooftop, and I would shine it through this valley. As we were riding along, we came to this area, and we were looking at the deer back in the field behind me. And we noticed something as I took the light and would sweep it through the valley looking at the deer. We spotted these eyes. And these eyes were different. They were up higher than the deer. And we stopped, and we backed up, and we looked again with the light. And down in the corner of this field is where we saw the creature. At first it was just standing among the deer, but then when I hit it with the light, it looked at us. It turned and walked back through the valley. It walked in like a lumbering gait. It wasn't running, wasn't in a rush. It was just moving away at a fair pace. Twice as it moved back through this valley, it would look over its shoulder when it was walking, and it would just turn its head and look back, turn its head and keep walking. We watched it as it stepped over something, possibly a log, a tall log or a fence back here. But it stepped high, but it never broke its stride. We watched as it turned basically into a shadow. We watched as it moved back through this field. We thought very hard about what could that have been. And from the height compared to the height of the deer eyes, of this creature's eyes, from what this shadow looked like, the bulk, the stride, we were absolutely convinced that we had seen Bigfoot in this field. A story from the Frasier land. I'm standing within the Frasier land. Behind me is the Salt River and the old JTS Brown Distillery. A few miles from here, a boy and girl went for a walk in the afternoon. They had done this many times before, but this time would be very different. As they turned a corner, they saw a large, hairy creature sitting on a log. They said that it was taller sitting than they were standing. It changed them forever. They ran. The family actually left the home a short time later. Once again, within the Frasier land, we have a creature that is without doubt Bigfoot.
This Bigfoot experience was so traumatic the children refused to be interviewed and are terrified to return to the area to this day.
Along the wilderness road they come. Behind them, the struggles of the Revolutionary War. Before them, the conquest of the wilderness. The journey is long and arduous, but it leads to a land of promise. Day after day, the party follows the unfamiliar trail.
There is probably no other unknown creature that arouses more curiosity than the Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Yes, there is the Loch Ness Monster, the Chupacabra, and other great beasts of lore, but the Bigfoot remains the most compelling as it pulls us towards ourselves, shadowing the unknown X factor of our very origins.
I'm standing at this beautiful waterfall along an area known as Gilbert's Creek, which is along the Kentucky River in Anderson County. Surrounded by these beautiful hills and trees and so forth. Many years ago, my friend was hiking up in this area above these tree lines. He had his dog with him. They had many years of outdoor experience. As he walked into a field up above, his dog alerted and looked up. About that time, a deer came out of the side of the woods and ran across the field. He then looked to the right, the upper right corner, and he saw something turn. As he looked, he realized it was a large black cat, but not just your normal, what you would consider to be a black cat. Its stomach was enlarged. It ran very close to the ground. His tail was curled under. He said it was a very strange thing to see. He watched as it moved out of sight. His dog just kept looking. So approximately 500 yards from where I'm standing, two men were coming down the road at Gilbert's Creek one night. They were in a small sports car. They came around the curve on the rock road, and what they saw affected them for many years. They witnessed an animal walk off the side of the hill on its back legs, 5 to 6 feet tall, a wolf-like creature with an extended stomach. They watched as it crossed the road and vanished into a field. So here we are, all this beauty and serenity, these hillsides of Kentucky, but up in these hillsides, there lurks rather strange animals. Here in Anderson County, a man who could see his cornfield from his backyard, not once, but on several occasions, watched as what he clearly stated was this Bigfoot creature walking through his cornfield. He could see the creature above the corn. He had no doubt what he saw was a Bigfoot.
A man who lives on a large roaming property deep in the heart of the Frasier land has had numerous strange occurrences over the years. He has never publicly spoken of the many strange things he has seen and heard until now. The reality team were offered exclusive access to this story and amazing sightings. His voice and appearance have been changed at his request.
Yes, I was going to spend the night on the land that I was in the process of buying. And I brought a little bedroll and some other paraphernalia, camping paraphernalia. Got here a little before dark, several hundred yards from this exact spot. And built a little fire and prepared to spend the evening. I believe I had some campfire coffee and things of that nature. It got dark and you could no longer see anything beyond maybe 20 feet. I heard something large moving through the brush about 60 to 70 yards from where I was bedded down. And I first said, well, maybe there is a deer moving through there, but it made a sound that was unlike a deer would make, in that it made a big footprint. And by big footprint I mean that it placed its weight down upon branches of a large diameter and crushed them as it moved through the brush. A deer will not do that. The next day, or possibly 2 days later, walked back here to look at the area, and there were many trees very similar to the one that is to my left. I don't know if you see the tree here, this tree. And there were trees in a large area, about that, some slightly bigger than that, but most of them about that size, broken off level at about 7 feet in the air, just about a foot above my head. And I found it very unusual. It was a large area, probably of irregular shape, and probably encompassed 50 trees.
When you say you heard a disturbance the night before, was there a storm? Was there anything that something natural happened to hurt these trees?
No, that was the thing that made me come so quickly to see what the source of the disturbance was, and it was a thrashing sound, as you would hear from that great a distance. And I could just tell that there was a lot of movement in the brush. I heard a large ruckus in the yard. I had 3 pretty good sized dogs, about 2/3 grown. They were between 50 and 60 pounds. And they were fighting with something east of my residence in an open field. And I went out the door with the light to see if I could see what was happening, and I could see them running in and doing battle with something significantly larger than them. And I have no real, it was at the edge of my light. I could see the dogs, I could see their backs to me, and I could see this broadside view of this large animal that looked to me to have a low-hanging belly, was much longer than the dogs, and the dogs would rush in at the creature, whatever it was, and I would hear one yelp and go backwards, and all three of them would go backwards when that happened. Then they would attack it again, and that repeated, and they moved away from me and got out of the edge of my darkness, or out of the edge of my light into the darkness, and I could still see or hear the event taking place, but I couldn't see it. Not wanting to go out there, I didn't want to risk injury to the dogs, so I went in the house. The next day, I went out to check the dogs. Two of the dogs were badly mauled. Their faces and heads were scratched and with deep scratches. And one of the dogs was missing, had been carried off. That was my conclusion. Whether or not that was accurate, I don't know, but that was all I could conclude with what I'd seen.
You never saw the dog again?
Never saw the dog again.
As time has gone on, you've lived here. As you've told us, you've had many extremely interesting events. But perhaps one of the most interesting is what is now known as the Frasier sound. And you have recorded it. It is available. And if you would, just go over your interaction with this sound over the years.
I probably first started hearing the sound about 10 years ago. I never did think too much of it because there have always been sounds out here, but I started to hear it on a regular basis, and I heard it on a regular pathway. And when I listened to it, I said, well, it must be a deer. And then the more I thought, the more I came to the conclusion it's not a deer. I've never heard a deer make a sound like that. And as I said, I've heard deer and watched them and observed them for over 50 years. And at that time, at that point, I established that it was following a definite track. And I started noticing that the sound was always heard right at dark or afterwards. And I have heard the sound only when it was about dark. I can't recall the term for such animals. I think they're referred to as crepuscular or something along that line, that primarily come out at darkness. The animal or creature or whatever we can call it moves through areas that I can barely walk through with a relatively great amount of speed. At that point, when I started becoming concerned that it wasn't a deer, I started to listen to it closely. I noticed several things about the sound. The sound moved with what I considered great rapidity through extremely dense brush. I have walked the brush myself up the creek bottom. It covered a distance of several hundred yards through dense brush in 3 to 10, maybe 12 minutes max. That's extremely fast. It often got in close proximity to the house or wherever I happened to be, and it had some unusual, I never did hear any footfalls. I listened intently for footfalls. I could not hear them. I couldn't tell if it was bipedal or quadruped. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know if it was on the ground or airborne, but I could hear the sound, and the sound was exactly the sound that I recorded that night, that it was in close proximity to the house. It had some very, very unusual characteristics, and they started to concern me. And the characteristic that concerned me the most was that when I was in the woods and it was traveling through the woods, it approached me. And I have never in all these years that I've been in the woods had any animal in this part of my travels approach me in any way. All animals flee from humans in the woods, and that's been my experience. That might vary in other places, but here, that is the case. And on more than one occasion, two that I can remember very well, it approached me to within 30 to 40 feet, and it was in the darkness, and that started to concern me. I never really felt great amount of fear, but I had some concern in that the dogs that normally always accompany me in a nocturnal walk stayed at a distance of probably approaching 200 to 300 feet and wouldn't come to me when I called them when the sound was close by. That did concern me.
We're in an area with a rock fence, and you have said that you came up in here and you found these rock structures. Tell us a little bit about what you found up in this area.
Well, the things that I have found in this area, this is one. This is a large structure that I first attributed to being nothing more than a pile of rocks that someone maybe stockpiled to clean up the area, the land here, to make the land tillable. Then in looking at the land, I readily recognized that this land will never be tillable, so no one was stacking rock for that purpose. The rock fences here have been completed for, I cannot estimate, I would say approaching 300 years or more, and these rock piles would not have been placed so far from the rock fences if they were placed for use in the fences, and the fences were completed, and some of them are now in ruins, and some of them are still perfect.
You came across a very unusual track, a foot track on this property.
Yes.
Very large track. Would you give us some insight into that track that you found?
Yes, it was in the midst of a terrible drought, and I had heard that sound that was referred to earlier as the Frasier sound, moving through the creek bed in close proximity to my house. Hearing it moving through that creek bed, I said, well, if there's any chance of it leaving a trail, it would be in the creek bed. And it was in very close time to that time that I recorded the sound, which made my interest at an extremely high level. So I went out and looked very closely up and down that creek bottom, which was admittedly dry, but it was the most moist area in that area. And I found what looked to be a large, one single track where a foot had appeared to have slid or moved sideways because of the green moss and it was of the foot was it appeared to be of a human shape, but it was extremely large. My measurements, and they were crude because I couldn't see a clear outline of the footprint. It was in hard mud, but mud with moss on it. It was in a proximity of 17 inches.
You have mentioned that back in this area there's a circle. This circle has some unusual qualities. Please tell us about this circle.
Yeah, I used to walk in this area in the dead of winter, because right now we're about on the outer limits of the time with which you can move through here. The foliage is, as you can see, starting to appear on the bushes. You can't see where you're walking.